AAG, Ascension Advisory Group, where faith and business intersect.
So no matter where you are in life today, the one thing that I can assure you is God has not made another one of you.
Ascension Advisory Group presents another video workshop. Today's session is with attorney, speaker, Hollywood producer, and author Curtis Wallace. Curtis Wallace has impacted the lives of millions of people around the world by helping businesses, pastors, and ministries grow to their full potential. We at AAG are confident this message will inspire you to fulfill your calling to greatness. And now, Mr. Curtis Wallace.
Well, wonderful. That sets the perfect atmosphere for what I want to do tonight. Because if you were here with us last night, I promised you a dinner party tonight. So we are going to have a dinner party. So let me explain why I want to do this and what this is all about. The theme of this conference is transformation. But before you can transform, before you can change, you have to be exposed to something. You have to be exposed to something you haven't been exposed to before to know what you can transform into. So what I want to do is have a dinner party and invite some special guests. One of my favorite sayings from Bishop Jakes is, if you're always the smartest person in the room, you need to get into a new room. You need to get stretched. You need to be exposed to new and different things. So what I would like to do tonight is we're going to have a fantasy dinner party together. And we're going to invite some of the people that I would invite to dinner at my house if I had the choice of who to invite. And the reason that I want to invite each of these people to my house is because I believe they each have a special lesson in leadership to teach us. And each one is different. So what I want to do is one by one, we're going to bring these people to our dinner party and we're going to learn what they have to show us, what they can expose us to. And the first person that I want to invite to my fantasy dinner party is Noah. I have to have Noah at my dinner party. If you think about what this man did, 600 years old and building an ark, people had to think he was crazy. As a matter of fact, Hollywood made a movie about it. Because clearly this had to be a crazy individual. He is out here building this ark. You can imagine what all the people in town had to say about Noah. You can imagine what his family was probably saying about Noah. But because of that, there's a couple of things that he can really teach us. One is, he is the best example I know of staying the course. When you know that God has directed you to do something, to stay that course no matter what. Can you imagine the criticism that he was facing from everybody in his life? Everybody that he knew literally thought this man was crazy, that he was insane. What was he doing out here at 600 years old building this boat? What was that boat for? What was it all about? But Noah knew that he had divine direction. He knew that he couldn't listen to the critics. So the first thing that Noah would teach us is don't listen to the naysayers. If you know you are on the right path and you know that God has directed what you are doing, you need to stay that path no matter what. Don't listen to the critics. Don't listen to the naysayers. Don't listen to all the people trying to put negative things into your life about what you're doing and how it's wrong and how you're wasting your time. Because if you know it's right and you know it's from God, then you keep doing it. The next thing that I think that we can learn from Noah is that one man can make all the difference. I mean, to think about it. What would have happened to the world without Noah? One man made all the difference. He made all of us possible because one man listened. So don't think that because you're alone, because everybody else is negative, that you can't do it. Because one person can and will make all the difference. As you advance in life and as you start to succeed, one thing I can tell you that you need to get ready for with success is a certain degree of loneliness. Success is so much harder than failure. Because when you start to succeed at something, all the attacks start coming out. We all want to knock people down when they reach a certain level of success. And so it takes that ability to know that if you have to, you can go it alone. Because in reality, you're not alone. You have God with you. He's directed your path. So know that one person, you by yourself, divinely directed on the right path, can make all of the difference. There's a third thing that I think that Noah can really teach us. Don't be afraid to do something for the first time. Noah changed the direction of human history with something he did for the first time. As you go through life, whether it's in your ministry or in your business, don't be afraid to do something for the first time. Because until you do it for the first time, you can't get to the second time. You can't get to the second time. I heard John Maxwell speak recently, and he was talking about how people would come to him and say, "John, you're such a good speaker. You're such a good speaker. You know, how do you do that?" He said, "I've done this 12,000 times. If I'm not good by now, there's a problem. But you weren't there for the first time." You know, as good a preacher as Bishop Jakes is, I wasn't there the first time. And I bet it was nothing like it is today. And it's the same way with your life. You've got to be willing to do it for the first time, to not be afraid, because everybody's going to tell you you're going to fail. And you know what? Let me just relieve your suffering right now. You are going to mess it up the first time. You are never going to do anything completely right the first time. But the first time is going to give you the second time. And you're going to get better at it. And you're going to continue to progress. If you've got a business, you can do your business plan and you can budget. And my wife can tell you this because she runs a business very successfully. No matter how well you plan, no matter how well you budget, you're not going to get it all right. It's an evolving, moving process of constantly learning. But you have to start somewhere, which means you can't be afraid to do it for the first time. Whatever it is, if you know that you're being directed on a path, you just have to get started. Half of the secret of success in life is showing up. And last night they were talking about how 97% of the people just work for somebody else. And they're working to make that person wealthy. And the 3% of the people own the businesses and control the wealth. And it's true, because it's those 3% of the people that did it the first time. And they took that step on faith. And they knew what they were doing was right. And until they did that, they didn't have anything. So you've got to make that choice in your life. Are you going to continue doing what you're doing, hoping for a different result? Or are you going to be brave enough and bold enough to do something for the first time? So, I mean, isn't it amazing all these lessons that we can learn from Noah after all this time. From this crazy, insane man who was crazy enough to listen to God and build this ark when everybody told him he was crazy, that he shouldn't be doing it. He was one man who made all the difference. He was one man who wasn't afraid to try something for the first time. And he was one man who was willing to go it alone. So what a great lesson that we've learned from having Noah at our party tonight. The next person that I want to invite to our party, my wife will tell you I am currently obsessed with. I talk about this all the time. But the next person we're going to invite to our dinner party is Abraham Lincoln. I think many people would agree that Abraham Lincoln is probably our greatest president. But before I talk about the lessons that Abraham Lincoln's going to show us, I want to tell you a little bit more about Abraham Lincoln that you may or may not know. While a lot of us would agree that if he's not the greatest of our U.S. presidents, he's at least in the top 2 or 3. The one thing I can most assuredly tell you is that Abraham Lincoln was without a doubt our least qualified president. Abraham Lincoln was a self-taught, not university taught, a self-taught country lawyer. He traveled from town to town with the circuit judges trying cases. The sum total of his political experience before he was president was one unremarkable 2-year term in the U.S. House of Representatives 20 years before, in the 1840s. Before he ran for president, he had just twice in a row lost races for the U.S. Senate. Abraham Lincoln was a self-taught, failed politician at the time of our country's greatest crisis. When he decided to run for president, he ran against 3 rivals, all of which had far more experience than he did in politics and in government, all of which had far greater recognition, name recognition, than he did. He was by far the least of those 4 candidates for the Republican nomination. He was that guy, you know when they have the presidential debates in the primaries, and there's 2 or 3 guys there that you think really have a chance, and then there's that guy over on the left that they didn't even want to let into the debate? That was Lincoln. Nobody knew who he was, really. And this was at a time when you really didn't go out and campaign for president. People kind of did it for you. You know, he didn't even go to the Republican convention. It wasn't the way it is now. Today, when you have the convention, everybody knows who the candidate is before you get there because we have the primaries. It wasn't that way then. Nobody knew who was actually, everybody thought they knew who was going to win at the convention, but nobody really knows. You get there and then you vote. It's not like you have the primaries in advance. So Abraham Lincoln took everybody by surprise. One of the interesting things about that convention is, while he was kind of the least candidate, he was everybody's number 2 choice. Kind of everybody had their one guy they wanted to be it. But if it wasn't going to be him, he was kind of everybody's number 2. He was the safe guy. And after the first round of voting, one guy just barely missed getting the majority to get the nomination. Just barely missed it. So everybody was surely he's going to get the nomination on the next vote. But on the next vote, a few more of those people voted for Lincoln. And then on the 3rd vote, he was finally elected. But just think about this. The guy that we think about as our greatest president was probably, I think definitely, our least qualified. But he was the one who God needed there for that particular time. Now, there's some unique lessons that I think that we can take from Lincoln. One of which is this guy, who was probably our least qualified president, gets the nomination and then is able to cobble together the votes, and actually win the election, and becomes president in 1860. He knows that the country is about to fracture. As a result of his election, on his anti-slavery platform, he knew that the South was about to succeed. He was facing the greatest crisis in the history of our country. And what did he do? Every one of those three men who ran against him for the Republican nomination, he put on his cabinet. He created a team of rivals. Why did he do that? He knew the country was in crisis, and he needed the best possible people around him. He is the exception among leaders. He surrounded himself with the strongest possible team. The reason those rivals all took the jobs as his Secretary of War and Secretary of State and Secretary of Treasury is they thought, this is great. Lincoln's nobody. I'm going to run all over him. I'm going to take this job and I'm going to run the country even though I'm not the president. That's why those guys took that job. But Lincoln was secure enough in himself to know that he could surround himself with his rivals because he knew he needed the information and the relationships that they had. But he could listen to them and still make his own decisions to do what was best for the country. That is one of the most critical lessons that leaders can learn, is to surround yourself with the strongest team possible. Weak leaders will surround themselves with weak people because they are too intimidated and too insecure to surround themselves with smart people who will challenge them. One of the things that I've learned in business over the years is anytime I have an employee and that employee starts pitching a fit when I hire somebody really good to work with them or under them, I know I have a problem. You, as a leader, want to hire people who are smarter than you are to help you become better. Weak people hire weak people trying to make themselves look better in comparison. Do you understand that? If you're weak, you're insecure, you don't want people around you who actually know what they're doing. I had one employee one time back when we were doing the plays, a lady who worked for us. As a matter of fact, come to think of it, I think she was from Sacramento. Hope she's not here. But I found a young guy that Jelena knows named Derek Williams 10 years ago, and Derek is still with us. He runs the conferences. He's now doing a lot of what I used to do with the movies. Derek is great. But I tell you what, as soon as I hired Derek, this lady started doing everything she could do to get rid of him. And it's because she knew that he knew what he was doing. And he was in the same area as her. And she was worried, and it happened, that pretty soon he was going to expose her for what she was. Because weak people don't want strong people around them. And if you look at the top ministries in this country, the ones that have been able to sustain themselves over the years, they all have great teams. And Bishop Jakes is always saying, find me more thinkers. I need more smart people. I can't get enough smart people around me. Because he knows he's doing things that haven't been done before. And to accomplish great things, you need great people. All you need to change the world is a small group of highly dedicated, highly qualified people, and they can move mountains. You don't need a lot of mediocrity. You need a little bit of excellence. So that's the big lesson that we can take from Abraham Lincoln, is if you want to be a real leader and you want to be a strong leader, you need to go find the strongest team you can around you. Whether you're running a business or running a church, you need people that are smarter than you, that know things that you don't know. But then you need to be strong enough to listen to everybody and make your own decisions. My wife knows one of my favorite television shows of all time is The West Wing. And what I loved, it was about the president and his staff. And what I loved about The West Wing was how it illustrated decision-making by the president. Because he would deliberately have incredibly smart people take different sides of an argument. Because he wanted to hear everything. He wanted to get all the information. He wanted to get all the input. And then he made a decision. You listen to everybody. You take all the information in. You get the best information you can. And then you, as a leader, make the decision. And it takes a confident, secure person to do that. You've got to have a great team around you. You need people who are smarter than you. And if you are a weak-minded leader, you can't do that. Because then all you're worried about is how am I going to look compared to them? What you don't realize is your team will make you better. Your team will make you better. The next thing that Lincoln is going to share with us at this dinner party is that sometimes at the end of the day, you have to stop planning and you have to start fighting. Sometimes you have to start fighting. When the Civil War started, Lincoln had a general named McClellan who was a top West Point graduate. He had all the credentials, and he was the leader of the Union forces. But there was only one problem with McClellan. At the end of the day, all he wanted to do was prepare, and he didn't want to go to battle. The Civil War could have been over so much earlier than it was. Millions of lives could have been saved if McClellan would have gone to battle when Lincoln told him to. But all he wanted to do was tell Lincoln why they couldn't do it, and why they weren't ready, and why they didn't have enough guns, and why they didn't have enough men. So Lincoln eventually had to get the next guy that we're going to invite to our party. The next guy that we're going to invite to our party was General Grant. And as unlikely a character as Lincoln was to save this country, Grant was equally unlikely. Grant had been to West Point. He was a West Point graduate, but unremarkable. The only thing that Grant was good at West Point was being in the cavalry and fighting. That's what he was good at. So the Army being the Army, they made him a quartermaster. He was put over supplies and logistics. But Grant was a true soldier. So being over supplies and logistics was not something he could do. So he was eventually run out of the Army for drinking. Then he went on to a failed business career. When the Civil War started, General Grant was not even in the Army, was not even in the military. Then he volunteered in his state, and he was recruiting volunteers and training those volunteers how to be soldiers. And then eventually he got asked to do some battles, and he started having success. And he eventually came to the attention of Lincoln. And just imagine the physical picture of these two guys. Lincoln, really tall and lanky, about 6'5", skinny as a beanpole. And Grant is this little bitty guy. And together, these two unlikely characters saved our country. Both of them, on paper, woefully unqualified for what they were asked to do. But General Grant was built for one thing: to fight the battle at the right time. He didn't want to prepare. He didn't want to get ready. He didn't want to complain about what he didn't have. What he wanted to do was go fight somebody. And he could motivate his men to go do that. McClellan was busy in his mansion having dinner parties and writing letters to Lincoln about why we couldn't do this. And Grant didn't do that. Grant got on his horse, got in front of some men, and went out and won a war. And we're all here today because of that. So there's a couple of unique lessons that I think we can learn from General Grant while we're all sitting around the dinner table tonight. One of which is God is preparing you for something. There's something coming in your life that God is preparing you for. Just imagine what it must have been like to be General Grant before the Civil War. You'd been run out of the Army because you couldn't do that, because you couldn't be the guy responsible for making sure supplies got where they needed to be. You tried to go into business a couple of times, and that didn't work out because you were just not cut out to be a businessman. But God had a place for General Grant. And when his calling, which was being a soldier, coincided with his purpose to win the Civil War, he changed the world. So no matter where you are in life today, the one thing that I can assure you is God has not made another one of you. I mean, listen to this. You are unique. There are no two people here that are alike. There are no two people in the world that are alike. There is nobody else who has my unique combination of experience and life experience and education and everything else that goes into making Curtis Curtis. Nobody else can be a better Curtis than I can. Nobody else can be a better you than you. And the reason that God made you unique is because there's a special purpose for you. And when you find that purpose and it meets your calling, then you're ready for greatness. It doesn't matter how bad things are right now. It doesn't matter what you have failed at in the past. There is a purpose for you. God has a plan for you. And when it all comes together, it gives you that confidence. And you know you're in the right place, and you're doing the right thing, and you can accomplish great things. So don't ever think that you can't get there. Because if a failed politician and a failed soldier can team together to save this country, what can you do? What can you do? That's what you need to ask yourself. Now let's get a little bit less removed from history, and this person just recently died, so I'm going to invite Steve Jobs to our party. I am a huge fan of Steve Jobs. Never got to meet him, but I've read a lot about him since he died and studied Apple Computer. You know, Apple became, under Steve Jobs, the most valuable corporation in the world. And I want to invite him to his party because I think in telling us his story about how he turned around Apple, we're going to learn some great leadership lessons. Steve Jobs was one of two founders of Apple Computer. He ran the company for a while, he became disillusioned with it, then kind of went off on this quest to find himself, and he left the company. And then the company got into very significant trouble. Apple was basically failing. And so Steve Jobs came back to be CEO of the company. And he turned it around in a very short time, and like I said, made it the single most valuable company in the world at the time when he was still alive. Since he's died, the stock price has gone down a little bit. I think Exxon's more valuable, but he created the most valuable company in the world. And there's some great lessons there in how he did it. If you heard me speak earlier today, you heard me say this, so I'll say it again. But the first thing he did was Apple was making 300 products, 300 different products at the time he took it over. He cut that down to 10. He cut it to 10 products. Steve Jobs is going to talk to us at our party tonight about the power of focus. It's not about being able to do a lot of things. It's about being able to do a few things exceedingly well. Steve Jobs knew that if he was trying to create 300 different products, that he was not going to have his A team of engineers and designers and marketing people. They couldn't work on 300 different products. But he knew if he focused the company, and this guy, the company is struggling as it is. They're selling all these products. And he bet the entire company that he could replace the money they were making with 300 products with the money they were going to make from 10. Think about that. He cut out the revenue, eliminated all the money the company was making from 290 products so that he could focus on 10 of them because he knew those 10 were the right 10. That's what he did as a leader. He focused the company. One of the big problems that I see that we have in churches specifically today is we love to talk about all the different things that we do. And my church has 150 different ministries. And we have a ministry for this, we have a ministry for that, we have a ministry for the other thing. I only have one question for you. How many of them work? If they're not working, why are you doing it? We need to bring focus to our churches. We need to bring focus to our companies. You have to know what your vision is. You have to know what your mission is. And you focus like a laser beam on that. There are lots of good ideas. In my position with Bishop Jakes, I get 100 good ideas presented to us a week. My job is to say no to all of them almost. Because my job is to keep us focused. We would drown in the sea of opportunity trying to chase all the things that come to us. And it's not that they're bad ideas. It's that they're bad ideas for us. You have to decide what your church is good at. What can your church do that other people can't do? That's what builds a business. The reason Apple completely changed the music business is they did something the music companies wouldn't do for themselves. They completely transformed an industry that they were not even in when Steve Jobs took the company back over. And now Apple controls, and I mean, I run a record label, so I know, Apple controls the music business in this country. There is no bigger player in the music business than Apple. And a technology company did that. And they did it with focus. They did it with focus. They knew what they could do really well. That's how your business will succeed, is you need to find a need in the marketplace that you can meet like nobody else can meet that need. And when you do that, then you will have true success as a leader in your organization. You've got to bring that power of focus to what you're doing. The other thing that Steve Jobs will talk to us about at this dinner party is the power of the experience, the customer experience. Why do we all, I can't tell you how many Apple products I see out right now. I think about every other person in this room has one out right now that they're using to take notes with, their iPads or their iPhones or their i-something. Why do we all use them? Because they're a great tool. They give you a great experience. They're easy to use. They're simple. They're intuitive. They give an incredible customer experience. You don't have to know a thing about computers to operate your iPad. My 8-year-old little girl can do things with my iPad that amaze me that I didn't even know you could do. Nobody trained her how to do any of it. It's intuitive. He created a customer experience with his products that's unrivaled in technology. That's why all the other computer makers are struggling to make a profit, and Apple's the most valuable company in the world. Because he delivered an experience that nobody else did. I told this story this morning, but I'm going to tell it again because I love it. Me and my wife have 4 children. And we have 3 teenage sons, or one's now 20, I guess, and an 8-year-old little girl. There's a tradition in the Wallace house that every summer we take the kids to Disneyland in California for a week. Now, one of the things I've noticed is that Disneyland has most of the same rides that a theme park right down the street from my house has. We have Six Flags in Texas. It's about 15 minutes from my house. But we don't drive 15 minutes and go to Six Flags. My kids won't hear of it. Instead, I buy 6 airline tickets. We fly a family to California. We stay in a hotel for a week, and we pay 10 times the price for tickets. And I'm happy about it. Why? Because Disney gives me an experience. From the time I get off the shuttle bus in the parking lot, the music is playing. And they are making me feel good about standing in line and spending money. Every pastor in here needs to go to Disneyland, and every pastor in here needs to start thinking about how can I give my congregation an experience that's unparalleled. Because let me tell you what the reality of the world is right now. The reality of the world right now is that you could get up on Sunday morning and live stream services from every major ministry in this country. The biggest audience the Potter's House has on Sunday morning is not the audience in the Potter's House in Dallas. It is by far the audience online. It's people in California and people in Nigeria and people in the Middle East that are watching Bishop Jakes online. And that's where our biggest audience is right now. That means you and your church have a real challenge on your hands. You now have to create an experience that people can't get anywhere unless they come to your church. You have to harness the power of the experience, just like Disney has, and just like Steve Jobs did. You cannot continue to do church the same way and expect that you're going to get new, dramatic, and different results. You are going to have to change the way that you're doing things. If you're running a business right now and you can't figure out why it's not working, why don't you take a step back and see what it's like to be a customer of your company? Recently, I challenged the leadership of the Potter's House because we were talking about, like every other church, we struggle from time to time with we bring a lot of people in, but sometimes people leave. Or people will come for a first time to visit, but they won't join the church. And so we're talking about ways that we could address these problems. And so I was in a meeting with all of our leadership, all of our department heads, and I said, here's one of the problems. I said, everybody sitting in this room right now has an assigned parking place. There's not one of you who knows what it's like to get here on Sunday morning and park across that 6-lane road in the 20-acre parking lot we have to have across the street because this parking lot's not big enough, and walk across that sky bridge or take our shuttle bus. I said, we have got to get out of the pews on Sunday morning. And Bishop Jakes made it a mandate for our staff. I do not want to see you, if you're in senior leadership in this church, I do not want to see you sitting in that pew on Sunday morning. You better be out there finding out what it's like for everybody else. What is it like in that parking lot? What is it like in the children's ministry? What is it like in the youth church? How can we make all of those things better? Because they all contribute to the experience that we're delivering. And if you're sitting up here on the front row, you don't have any idea what the experience is for everybody else. You've got to get out there to experience it. My wife is with me today, and she runs a business. She runs a private Christian preschool and academy. I was telling some people earlier that I walked into the school one night. I was going to meet her. We were going to go have dinner after work. And I walked in, and she was in a classroom, and she was standing up on a stool. And I'm like, what are you doing? You're standing up on this stool in this classroom. She said, well, I've got a dad in this classroom, and he's a professional football player, and he's 6'6". He said, I can't see what he sees. So she got up on a stool because she wanted to know what the experience of walking into that room was like for him, to make sure she wasn't missing something. And then you see her get down on her hands and knees because she wants to know what it's like in that room for a 2-year-old. You have to know who your customer is. You have to see your church. You have to see your business through their eyes. That's what's going to help you build the experience you need. What is it like to do business with you? Do you return your phone calls? You know what can kill a church as fast as anything? It doesn't matter how great the preaching is on Sunday morning. If you got the wrong guy running the parking lot, your church is not going to grow. You know, now I spend a lot of my time working with different churches all over the country, so I go to a lot of different ones. One of the things I like to do is just see what that experience is like for somebody who's new. I don't want you to plan to receive me. I don't want to come in through the private entrance. I don't want to have a seat reserved. I want to see what the experience is like. Because I can't tell you how many times pastors have come to me and he says, you know, we're getting new people in all the time, but people are just not joining the church. And sometimes it's something as simple as, Pastor, do you have any clue who's running your parking lot? Because there's a lot of great churches and a lot of great guys that are out there running those parking lots, and it's a hard job, and I really respect them. But I've been to a handful of churches, and it's that guy in the parking lot, and you know who I'm talking about. He has no power and authority anywhere in his life until Sunday morning. And he is going to tell you where you're going to park that car. And as a result, I'm mad before I ever get in the door. And I'm going to tell you what, it doesn't matter how good the sermon is. I'm not coming back. You lost a member before they got in the door. You lost a member before they got in the door. You've got to get out there and find out what the experience is that your people are having. And if you do that, then you can make it the experience that the leader wants it to be. Because you know what kills progress faster than anything? Familiarity. What we get used to. All of a sudden, because you're used to it, because you see it every day, you don't notice it anymore. We were driving yesterday in the car, and I heard my wife on the phone just giving it to somebody in her office. But because before she left, she walked through a room in her building that wasn't the way it was supposed to be. And Jelena will not have you walk past something that's wrong and not fix it. You can't get used to things that are just okay. You know what sets the great hotels apart from the average ones? Is they pay attention to everything. You're not going to see dirt lying around. You're not going to see a dirty carpet. You're not going to walk into a room that's not immaculate. They understand they are premium. They understand that you're paying for an experience. And I love the Four Seasons and I love Ritz-Carlton. And it's because I know what I'm going to get when I walk in the door. I just got back from Saudi Arabia a couple of weeks ago, and I stayed at a Ritz-Carlton in Saudi Arabia. I'd never been there before, but I didn't have to worry about whether or not I was going to have an incredible experience at the hotel, because Ritz-Carlton trains all of their people. And there's nobody who works at one of those hotels who walks past a problem. And the problem is, in some of our companies and some of our churches, we've become used to things. And we're just walking past the problem. And if you see people in your organization just walking past a problem, You need to train some people, or you need to change some people. The responsibility is on the leader to create the experience. And the way the leader creates that is by instilling his spirit into everybody who works for him of the excellence that is required. Though they do it from time to time, I will assure you that every person who works for my wife knows that you don't walk past a problem. They may not fix it every time, but she will correct it, and they will start fixing it, or they won't be there. Because she knows she has to deliver an experience to her clients. And it's got to be top tier. So that's the big thing that we can take away from Steve Jobs. You've got to create an experience. You've got to think about Disney. My family's been to Disney every year for 10 years. Not once in 10 years have I ever had a negative experience with a single Disney employee. Not a guy picking up trash, not a guy serving me at a restaurant, not somebody selling me something, not an actor in a production. I haven't had one negative experience in 10 years because that staff is trained. They are playing a role. They are there to provide an experience to the customers so the customers come back. You've got to create that experience in your church and in your business. And that's what's going to set you apart. The great companies give a great experience. And they have a value that everybody else wants to have, but they're not willing to do the work to get there. Because delivering that great experience is not free and it's not easy. And it requires an attention to detail that we need. The next person that I'm going to invite to our dinner party is my wife, Jelena. And I'm going to invite her to my dinner party for a couple of reasons. One is we don't have any women at the dinner party yet. The second reason is if I had all these wonderful people over to our house for dinner and she wasn't there, I would have to deal with my wife. And to quote one of my favorite movies, Steel Magnolias, I make it a point to never deal with my wife. I find my life is much more successful that way. But my wife has a couple of great leadership lessons that we can all learn. We, as I mentioned earlier, she owns a school. And we first started that school about 15 years ago. And she had been running a different school for some people, and she came to me and she said that she wanted her own school because she knew that she could do it better. So I said, great, let's go do it. At the time, I was practicing law, so I put together a deal with some of my law partners, and we built one school, and then we bought another one. And we ran those successfully for a while, but then our partners wanted to do different things and go in different directions, and as every business relationship does, that one came to an end. So we decided to sell the schools. So we sold the schools to this big national company from Phoenix that has hundreds of these private schools around the country. And they wanted to try getting into the Christian school business. So they bought our schools and a couple of others. And my wife agreed, she signed a contract with them, she agreed to stay there for 6 months in a transition to help them manage the school and manage the transition. And the 6 months came and the 6 months passed and she stayed. She could not tear herself away from those kids that she loved and the staff that she loves. She has had people that have worked for her for years and years, and she is truly the mother to that staff. I see that when she's out with them sometimes. I mean, she takes care of everything in their life. She is their mother, and she loves that staff, and she loves those kids, and that's her passion. That's her calling in life, is to give children the foundation they need with Christian education to go on to what they need to be in life. And that's a wonderful thing. All of my children have gotten their foundation at her school, and they've all been the better for it. But over time, Jelena kept staying, and 6 months turned into 5 years. And she was still there. But the company kept changing things. When they bought the schools, no, we're not going to change anything. We want you to run it the way you run it. And then over time, it started to change. Oh, we need you to put more kids in a room so that we can make more money. We want you to do a little bit less of this Christian stuff and a little bit more of this other stuff. So it finally got to the point where she said, as hard as it is for me, God is telling me it's time for me to leave. Now, I'd been telling her this for years, but she didn't listen to me. But she did finally listen to God, and she said, it's just time. I just can't do this anymore. I love those teachers. I love those kids. I love the parents. I'm so worried about what's going to happen to them, but I can't do this anymore. I have to leave. So she left. We threw her a big retirement party, the whole thing, and that was in May, a year ago. And then she had asked them 3 different times in the year before she left, can I buy this school back? I am passionate about this school. I care about this school. I want to run it, but I only want to run it if I own it. And every time they told her no. And then she left. And when she left the school, there was 180, 190 kids in the school. By August, it had dropped to 58 kids. So they never wanted to sell her the school because she was making money. Then it dropped to 58 kids, and this school was losing tens of thousands of dollars a month. And Jelena was getting all these phone calls from parents and from teachers saying, will you please come back? Will you do a school? She's like, well, I can't do that one, but maybe I can do another one. So we actually started looking for locations. We were picking out land. We went through a whole thing with the church. They wanted us to lease property from them. And then they decided, no, they didn't want to do it. And we were just running up against walls, trying to do another school. And then she comes home and tells me that, I just called the president of my old boss, and I bought the school back. And the great part is, she bought it back for 80% less than she sold it to them for. That's a blessing. And now she has her school back. She's filled the school back up. She brought her staff back together, and she's doing it the way she knows that God has told her to run her school. So the lesson that Jelena is going to give us today at our dinner party is that we have to listen to God, and sometimes we have to give something up and make a sacrifice to be able to get what God wants you to have. Think about this. I have no doubt in my mind God wanted Jelena to have that school and to be hers. But he knew until she walked away from what she loved that he couldn't give it to her the right way. She was being too successful for the other company. She was making too much money for them. Then she walked away. She had to make the sacrifice. She had to listen to what God was telling her. And then God just opened up the door. God knew they weren't going to listen to her. She tried to tell them, let me hire my replacement. They said, no, we don't want you involved in the process. They hired absolutely the wrong person who had no business running a Christian school, who didn't know what it was about, who didn't know what these parents were looking for their kids. And it all fell apart. And that was all God's plan to bless Jelena. But she had to make the sacrifice. If she hadn't made the sacrifice, she would still be there today in a job she didn't like. Well, she loved the job. She hated all the corporate stuff she had to do. But she would be there suffering through what she didn't like to be able to live out her passion with those kids. But she made the sacrifice that God told her to make. And now she's there with a job she loves, but now she's the beneficiary. It's her business, 100%. There's no partners telling her what to do. There's no big corporation telling her what to do. She's running it the way she wants to run it. Think about that. Are you willing to make the sacrifice today to get what God is going to give you in the future. So I think that's a pretty good lesson that Jelena gave us. The other lesson that we're going to learn from Jelena is to value relationships. Because she valued her relationships with those teachers, with those parents, and with those kids, when she came back to the school, they came back. Jelena now has kids at her school who are children of people who were kids in her school. That's long-term relationships. So when she got it back, she was able to fill it back up and to make the business work because she knew what she needed to do. But she had to value the relationships that she had to be able to do that. If she had left on the wrong terms, those people wouldn't have come back. She could have very easily said, I don't care about any of this, I don't like this company anymore, and left in the wrong way, but she left the right way. My wife gave a 1-year notice to her boss to say, find somebody to replace me. I want this done right. I don't want this school destroyed after I leave. She gave them a year's notice, and they still couldn't find the right person. But it was all part of God's plan. So make sure that you value those relationships in your life. And I'm out of time, but I need just a few more minutes because I got to invite the most important guest to our party. Can I do that? All right. We couldn't have the greatest dinner party of all time unless we invited Jesus. And there are some amazing, and I could go on, but I'm just going to do a couple. There are a couple of amazing leadership lessons that Jesus would have for us at our dinner party tonight. And I'll be very quick about this. One is, you've got to build a great team. Jesus knew what his destiny was. He had to have the disciples to do what he couldn't do after he fulfilled his destiny. What would have happened if Jesus hadn't built that team? They're the ones who carried the message after he made the sacrifice. So Jesus would talk to us about how we have to have a well-chosen team. Doesn't have to be a big team. He only had 12. He changed the entire world with 12 people. 12. So think about the team that in your company or in your church, the team that you're building. Are you building the kind of team that's going to change the world? Because even Jesus knew he couldn't do it all. He had a purpose to fulfill. And he needed a team to keep going after he had done that. And he built a team for that mission. So you need to know what your mission is for your organization, for your business, for your church. You need to know what your mission is, what your vision is, and then you need to build the team that's going to fulfill that vision. It only takes a few, but if you assemble the right team, you can accomplish so much more than you can accomplish by yourself. You've got to have that team. So he's going to tell us the first thing you've got to do is build a great team. Don't try to do it by yourself. The next thing, and I hope you get this, the next thing that Jesus is going to tell us, it can take a Judas to propel you to your destiny. It can take Judas to propel you to your destiny. So sometimes that person out there who has betrayed you the most can be the person that puts you where you need to be for that moment in history. Jelena knows his story. One of my best friends and my mentor, a man named Dalton Lott, very wealthy man. He told me his story about how he made a fortune, became a multimillionaire, and overnight lost virtually all of it because he was betrayed by his business partner. And Dalton told me how for years his wife was physically ill over it. He went from being a multimillionaire to living on his wife's salary as a school teacher and his unemployment, virtually overnight because he was betrayed in this business transaction. It made his wife physically ill for years because she could not overcome that betrayal. But if you ask Dalton, he says, I will sign up for it 10 times over. Because today, his business is about 100 times bigger than it was before. And he said, the lessons that I learned from that betrayal and from having to start over made me change the way I do my business. He made a commitment to start tithing from his business, that no matter what, he was going to do that. Now he is worth way over 10 times what he was ever worth before because of the lessons that he learned from that betrayal. So the question is, when Judas betrays you, are you going to become a victim or are you going to turn it into your destiny? Because from every bad thing that happens in your life, you have a choice. You become the victim or you overcome. Because life is that way. I can assure you that people in your life are going to violate your trust. People in your life are going to do you wrong. The question is, are you going to respond like Jesus, or are you going to be a victim? The choice is yours. Whether or not you go on to your destiny is up to you. It's all about the choices that you get to make. It's all about the choices that you get to make. It's all up to you. Do you want your destiny, or do you want to be a victim? That's the lesson that Judas and Jesus are going to give us tonight.
We hope this message inspired you to fulfill your calling to greatness. For more information about our services, just contact us or just visit our website. Once again, thank you for taking the time to watch another Ascension Advisory Group video workshop where faith and business intersect.